wondering if her parents were going to come back for her, or if she should go to their neighbours who'd know what to do. Somehow it seemed the soldiers hadn't noticed her tiny form curled up in the corner. After opening the door, she carefully crawled out, her limbs cramped from being confined for so long. Narrowing her eyes against the bright light in the room, she quickly squeezed them shut again, the scene of carnage in front of her too terrible to be true. The metallic stench of blood filled her nostrils. Slowly she opened them again. In front of her lay her parents, their guts spilled across the wooden floor, wide pools of dark red blood sinking into the boards. "Mama! Papa!" she whispered. But she could tell that they were beyond hearing her now, their sightless eyes staring up at the beams above them. Still on her hands and knees, she skirted past the horrific scene, her face averted. She crept downstairs, wondering if the soldiers had now gone. In her father's atelier, blood dripped through the ceiling onto the floor, where it lay in globules amongst the dust and dried herbs on the floor. It sank into the parchment laid on the table, blooming into red flowers and blurring the lines on the map he'd been working on. Sliding out of the door to the backyard, she tiptoed along the passage between their house and next door. On the other side of the wall, the street was littered with bodies and limbs and, whimpering in the back of her throat and with shaking legs, she pushed open the door to the neighbour's house and slipped inside. Chapter 1. Hay-on-Wye, Wales, June 2022. Robyn opened the shop door, pushing the rubber wedge underneath to keep it there. It had rained overnight, and the pavements were still damp, but the sun was already drying them, thin traces of steam rising to dissipate in the warmth. An early heat wave was always useful in bringing tourists to Hay-on-Wye, and all the shops, including her father's, needed the custom. Disappearing down the long passage to the kitchen and office at the rear of the shop, she filled and switched on the kettle. From upstairs, she could hear her father moving about in the flat they shared, and she knew it wouldn't be long before he appeared, ready to start the day. Recently, she'd started to feel that their living accommodation above the shop was shrinking. Less room for them to live together amicably, and she'd taken to getting up early and escaping outside or downstairs, giving them both breathing space. He would arrive in the shop, as he did every morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, ready to talk maps, both ancient and modern, atlases and globes, with anyone who wandered in through the door. It was all a world away from her real life, her before life, the busyness and fervour of London, her job as a journalist, and the nights out, parties in chic, expensive flats, the walls hung with original artwork. They'd lived the lives of bright young things, and she'd thought it would never end. But end it had. Her memories of that time now starting to fade, despite her desperate attempts to cling on to them. And she could feel them slipping through her fingers like the sand on the beach at Les Sables d'Olonne. Afterwards, she'd returned home to live with her father for a while in his beloved shop in Hay, where she'd been brought up. Since her mother had died 10 years previously, he'd been living on his own, although recently he'd started seeing Alison, a fellow bookshop owner in the town, and had found a new energy and love of life. Alison's son and daughter-in-law were now helping out in her shop, waiting in the wings until she retired, and they could take it on full-time. Her sojourn was originally only supposed to be for 6 months, while she took a sabbatical, but the time had stretched on, slipping past, and now she'd been there for years. There was a comfort to be found, though, surrounded by her childhood memories of growing up playing in the corridors of darkness that led to the deep recesses and corners of the ancient dusty shop, where the spirits of ancient map-makers and explorers wandered. These days, she'd occasionally think about running a cloth over the hundreds of storage boxes,